The Toronto Maple Leafs are battling for playoff position and they are reaching new milestones. The LA Kings are in the thick of the fight for the final playoff spots in the West. And the Columbus Blue Jackets are playing better in spite of a litany of injuries. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face to Locked On NHL viewers and a familiar voice for listeners, Michael DiStefano of Locked On Leafs. And Michael, Toronto is finding their stride right now, and some big milestones lately for Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see Toronto playing some good hockey here down the stretch. I mean, I think it bodes well going into the playoffs, obviously. You got a lot of teams, though, that are playing well at this point in the season that know it's time to hunker down and get to playing your best hockey. But, it's been a joy. It's been a pleasure to watch, especially what Auston Matthews has been able to do. Like this team, Toronto, the fan base is used to their, this team having regular season success. They're a squad that ever since Matthews and Marner got to the league back in 2016, they've made the playoffs every year. The COVID year, bubble aside, that's a different situation. But they made the playoffs pretty much every single season. And it's the playoff success that doesn't that has not come yet for this team. But what we've been able to watch over the course of the last, couple of years is some cool individual milestones, some team records that are being broken, some individual records that are being broken. And now we're at a point here with Auston Matthews. Every goal he scores from now until the end of the regular season, he's breaking a new personal and team record for goals scored by a Toronto Maple Leaf. So it's quite amazing. He's sitting at what he scores 64th this weekend against the Montreal Canadiens. And, the number 70 is still very much viable. It's there. He's just got to score a goal a game, and he's almost done that throughout the whole season. So it's very doable, and it's a really fun thing to kind of watch here down the stretch.
And then for Mitch Marner, actually, what is he now? 5th all-time on the assist list. I mean, he's still relatively young. That's a very impressive accomplishment for him.
Yeah, I mean, Mitch Marner, what this guy does, the way he can it's outstanding. And, I always talk about how people look at Matthews and Marner as like a Batman and Robin type of pairing because, Matthews gets most of the love, but Marner's just as like, I'd say he's just as good as Matthews, but like, it's almost like you got two Batmans here on the Maple Leafs. Like, comparing Marner to a subpar like Batman and Robin type of figure is a little disingenuous in my opinion. He's just so good, and him just continuing to move up the rankings is spectacular to see for a guy like him. But honestly, to me, where I don't think he gets enough credit around the league, I know those who pay attention to what's going on in Toronto are well aware, but and it's not just Marner, it's both of these players, how well and how sound they are defensively. Like, you look at guys who are perennial 90 to 100 plus point players like Marner and Matthews have been here the last few seasons. Both of them are always in the mix and in the conversation for the Selke as the best defensive forward in the NHL. And Mitch Marner, I think, was the runner-up last year, actually, in terms of Selke voting. So, it's funny. Everyone wants to always talk about the points that they put up. But when you listen to their teammates, they always want to make sure that they talk about the things they do defensively because they feel like they don't get enough credit for it. So, yeah, you've got Matthews breaking all these offensive records. You've got Marner moving up the chain in terms of being one of the best playmakers to ever wear a maple leaf. But what their teammates always want to talk about, which I find awesome, is how well they defend. And I think that people need to kind of start understanding and paying attention to that part of their game as well.
Yeah, very important and very impressive, and even more important come playoff time. And then, you're talking about Marner, the only 4 players he has ahead of him in Leafs history for assists: Dave Keon, Daryl Sittler, Matt Sundin, and Boreas Salming. That's some pretty elite company.
Yeah, I would say those are, for the guys when you talk about the top 5, 6 greatest Leafs of all time. Like those are the names that come up constantly. So he's right in that mix. In playoff success will go a long way for both of these two into cementing themselves as a couple of the greatest Leafs of all time. Hopefully, it comes sooner rather than later. Obviously, we'll see. Maybe this is the year where it happens. I think they've insulated these two a lot better this season than maybe they have in other years. Last year, what they did at the deadline, I think was good. I liked what they were able to do at the deadline to, kind of lengthen the roster a little bit. But this year, they've added a little bit of snarl, some size, not only to the back end but up front, and in those key positions in the top 6 with guys like Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi to kind of help them, play a little bit more of a hard nosed game in the top 6. So, this could be an interesting season for the Maple Leafs. It's a new general manager at the helm too. So obviously he's got a different vision than what Kyle Dubas had. And a lot of the guys he brought in, Ryan Reeves, another one of those players, were brought in for the playoffs. So in a couple weeks time, it'll be time to kind of put that to the test and see if they are playoff tested as they've been advertised since the day they were signed.
You mentioned the team is hitting their stride here as we head into the stretch. One big reason for that, goaltending. Talk to me about the turnaround of Ilya Samsonov in the second half of this season.
I mean, it's been incredible, and he was actually just nominated for the Maple Leafs. He's the Maple Leafs nominee for the Bill Masterton, the Perseverance Award, and I think that he's got a strong chance to maybe win the award. And I know usually it goes to someone who comes back from a sickness or a really bad injury, but mental health is no joke, and he was dealing with some serious demons earlier in the year. It got to a point where the Maple Leafs put him on waivers and he went completely unclaimed, and they didn't even bother sending him to the American Hockey League. They just said, just stay home for a week. Just stay home, clear your head, and get back. We'll do some work with you. We'll practice a little bit, but let's try and get your mind right, because he was really, really kicking himself after everything. And it got to a point where it was like, this guy can't put equipment on without allowing 7 goals on net. Takes a week, comes back, and he's been dynamite ever since. So the bounce back, the turnaround that he's had has been incredible, which is they're so lucky that this happened because Joseph Woll, a young goaltender, but someone who they thought, could be a starter or at least a tandem starter, ended up going down to injury, hurt his ankle. So they kind of had to bring Samsonov back into the fold again. And for him to get going and win them games, and now he's looking like he's reclaimed the starter's role. I think he got a shutout in his last outing, or 2 outings ago, rather, got a shutout. So he's back to being maybe playing his best that he's ever played in a Maple Leafs uniform. That's saying something, because statistically he was a top 10 goalie last year for Toronto, but his last 20 starts, he's won like 15 or 16 of those games. He's got like a .918 save percentage, which is well above league average. He's doing some good things for the Maple Leafs, and hopefully he can continue it into the playoffs.
Season has about a week and a half left, give or take. Is there one matchup that you think the Leafs would prefer and one they would like to avoid in the first round?
Oh, man. Honestly, I don't know how you feel about this, Gil, but I guess you're kind of in a similar circumstance where it's very much up in the air if your Islanders can get into the playoffs. But all kind of 4 of the teams that are possibilities, they're all tough outs. Like, I don't think that there's one team in particular that'll be a soft soft game that you kind of want, whether it's Boston or Florida. If the Leafs end up with the number 3 seed and they have to play whoever ends up with the 2 seed, maybe Tampa catches them and they end up, sitting with the wild card spot. So at that point, it's like, okay, is it going to be again, Boston, Florida, or is it going to be the Rangers or Carolina? Like realistically, those 4 teams, it's still up in the air as to who they're going to play in the first round. The same could be said pretty much for your Islanders as well, Gil. But ultimately, I don't think the Leafs are in a situation where they want to be picking who they want to play. Like the Boston Bruins have given them fits not only for many, many years, but all season long. The Leafs have not been able to get a victory off of them. They've played well against Florida, but like the Panthers are such a battle-tested team. They're a hard-nosed team that knows how to play playoff hockey and win in that style of game. Obviously, what we saw happen last year. The Rangers, they're just so deep, and the goaltender is just freakishly scary. And then Carolina is a team that's locked and loaded and ready and primed for a long playoff run. They brought in Jake Gensel and Evgeny Kuznetsov. They've fit like a glove. They've got elite goaltending, great structure, and they've got a good blend of size, skill, and speed. So that's a team too to go along with Rod the Bod, one of the best coaches of our era. Yeah, it's difficult to say who you'd rather play. I think they're all going to be favored against Toronto. They're all going to be difficult opponents. So honestly, I think most Leaf fans are just going to kind of sit and wait, and whoever the opponent is, hope that Toronto can dig deep and win. But I don't think anyone's sitting here saying we want that team. That happened last year, though. We want Florida chance came out, and clearly it didn't go very well. So I think Leaf fans learned from that mistake last season, and they're just going to take whatever opponent comes at them.
All right, Michael, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, each and every day, myself, along with Dave Morisuti, my co-host, we got Locked On Leafs. It's a daily podcast, Monday through Friday, just like all of our Locked On shows. You can find it wherever, whichever platform you use, audio-wise, also up on YouTube. You can find me on X/Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. So that's where you can find my stuff there.
Michael, always a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing you on Wednesday show.
Absolutely, Gil. Can't wait.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Regardless of where your favorite team is in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number 1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, or McKinnon will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On LA Kings, Eddie Garcia. And Eddie, the Kings are in the thick of a fight for playoff positioning right now. They seem to be playing better as of late. What has been the difference during this recent winning streak?
Well, I think the easy answer is probably health. They got Victor Arvidsson back not long ago, who missed most of the season because of back surgery, a second back surgery that he's had since joining the Kings. And he just brings a different element. He was kind of their trade deadline pickup because they did literally nothing at the deadline, but they knew he was coming back. They knew what he meant to the lineup. Makes them a deeper team, a more dangerous team. He's a guy who's just very active in the middle of everything. So him coming back has certainly helped out. It's helped out their number 1 power play unit as well. Had kind of a trickle-down effect as well. But really just getting healthy at the right time. Philip Deneau had been out for 4 games. He came back in the game against Vancouver Saturday night. and the Kings looked great. So I think the key for the Kings right now is just stay healthy. They've got a very favorable schedule down the stretch. They should be able to put some wins together going into the playoffs, and hopefully that'll be enough to get them to make some noise.
Big win over the Vancouver Canucks the other day. How does that affect this team's confidence heading down the stretch?
Well, as you mentioned, the playoff positioning is up for grabs. There's a couple of scenarios in which they could face Vancouver, which I think that they would very much like to do in the first round. One of them would be for Edmonton to catch Vancouver and win the Pacific. They're 3 points back going into the action on Monday. And the Kings, if they finish in the second wild card, if they, Nashville's battling with them for the wild card spot, and Vancouver does hold on in the Pacific, then there's a chance that would be actually I'm going to be backtrack that if they have the number one wild card spot, if they've passed Nashville. They passed Nashville this weekend. If they can hold on to that spot and Vancouver wins the Pacific, then they would face Vancouver as well. So it's been a favorable matchup for the Kings. We saw it on Saturday. For whatever reason, they play very well against the Canucks. 3-0-1 against the top team in the Pacific and the top team in the West for most of the season. So they just match up very favorably against Vancouver. So if they could pick their first round matchup, that would definitely be the one. The other potential matchups, Edmonton, they not so great against the Oilers, and they've beaten us in the first round the last 2 years, 1-2-1 this year against Edmonton, lost the last meeting. And then Dallas, they've really not matched up well against the Stars. They're 0-3 against Dallas this year, and I think they've been outscored something like 16-3. So the matchups, there's some positives and negatives. But and I know you can't really go into it wanting to pick who you're going to play as a player, and as a team, you just go out and you win the games and whatever happens. But if they could face the Canucks in the first round, I think a lot of Kings fans would be very happy about that.
Talk to me about the state of the goaltending as we head into the final 5 games of the season.
It's been very interesting. Cam Talbot was amazing to start the year, was named an NHL All-Star. And then around the time the team slumped, he went into a big tailspin. And whether the two things were just completely connected or not, I would assume they are. But he has since, after the All-Star break, bounced back strong, has been very good. I believe he's around 5th in the NHL in goals against and save percentage on the season. So even though he started off like a rocket ship, he came crashing down to earth, and now he's ascending again. So it's been an interesting season for him, and I guess for the Kings as well. Certainly, everyone's hoping in Los Angeles that the Kings are in an ascent again, because when they've shown that they are playing at their best, they've been one of the better teams in the NHL. The problem is obviously consistency. They lost 3 games in a row on a Western Canadian road trip. And then they come back home, and now they've won 3 games in a row. So it's been the up and down, both long term and sometimes short term. But again, when the Kings are on an upswing, they've shown they can be dangerous.
This team has a balanced offense. It's not like they rely on one player to score 50 goals and everybody else has 20. Who are some of the key players that need to shine down the stretch and in the playoffs for the Kings to have success?
Well, Trevor Moore just scored his 30th goal of the season against Vancouver. That's a career high and then some. He's had a breakout year. It looked at one point in the season he might approach 40. He cooled off a little bit as well. It's kind of the story with the Kings this year. They've had their high moments and they've had their low moments, and he's been an example of that as well. But he got number 30. Adrian Kempe is very hot right now. I believe it's 27 or 28 goals right now. He's approaching 30. Kevin Fiala is a very dangerous scorer. Mentioned Victor Arvidsson back in. Now, obviously, he hasn't played most of the year, but he's been a guy who has shown, 30 goal potential type of a player. Andre Kopitar, steady, doing it all. And I think one X factor for the Kings would probably be Quentin Byfield. He's had a breakout year as well. He's been a bit cold, though, lately as far as putting up the numbers. Been in a drought. He's been stuck on 19 for several weeks now. It'd be nice to see him get number 20, kind of get that off his back going into the playoffs. But no, there's definitely some pretty balanced scoring for the Kings. And you're talking about all the guys I mentioned. They're all, now with Arvidsson back, they all can spread them out over the top three lines and have three really strong lines with a sniper, if you will, on each one of those lines.
Right. How important is veteran leadership for this team? You've got guys like Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty who have won Stanley Cups with this organization, who have been through the wars. How important are they, especially come playoff time?
I think they're extremely important. Those two guys have a lot of mileage on them, but they're still playing at a high level. Kopitar, I think as important as a lot of other players are on the team, he's the most important. When he's going well, the team goes well. They really follow his lead. Now, they can win without him scoring necessarily, but like when they're really on their game, he's in the middle of it. And Drew Doughty almost played 29 minutes the other night. He's still carrying the load. I'm sure they maybe down the stretch here as they've got some favorable games. Maybe they ease back a bit and get him a little bit of rest going into the postseason. But no, he still leads, the defense. So the two most tenured players on the team, the two guys who are still around from the Stanley Cup years, are still as important to this team as anybody on this team. So it's not as if their roles haven't diminished in any way. Doughty's still on the top pairing. He's on the top power play. And Kopitar is the center in the top line, and he's on the number one power play unit. So those guys have been through it, but their roles are still as big as they've ever been.
All right, so finish this sentence for me. The LA Kings go on a long playoff run if.
I would say if they get the power play going. I think they're good enough 5-on-5. I think they're definitely good enough defensively. And to the surprise of some, I think they're good enough in net. The special teams, though, their power play has to give them something. It's been pretty inconsistent. It was a strength last year. It hasn't been the case this year. They emphasized the penalty kill going into this season because that was bad last year. It's been amongst the best in the league. So they've made the correction there, but they took a slide back on the power play. So if the power play can get going, and Victor Arvidsson does really help out with that, if they can get some production on the power play, I think that this team can do some damage.
All right, Eddie, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Obviously the podcast, wherever you find your podcast, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, all that. Also on YouTube, just search LA Kings. If you just search Kings, you might get a basketball team that plays in Northern California. So make sure you include the LA Kings, and on social media at LA Kings, at Locked On LA Kings.
All right, Eddie, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blue Jackets, Jay Foster. And Jay, it's been a rough season in Columbus. I mean, injuries just piling up, and yet the team has been playing a little bit better as of late, Sunday's loss notwithstanding. What has been the improvement that you've seen over the last, let's say, 6 games or so?
I mean, so first of all, we are in kind of that peak part of the season where the Blue Jackets love to go on a heater and try their best to ruin their own draft ranking and also ruin everyone else's chances at the playoffs, which we kind of saw on Saturday night against the Flyers, where they were like, you know what? The Flyers are pushing for a playoff spot. We're gonna ruin that for them because we think it's funny. But no, in all seriousness, sometimes it's weird. Sometimes you're missing guys from the lineup, and the rest of the guys are like, okay, well, we've got to kind of stand up and stick up for the team, and like basically they have to win it despite the loss of important personnel. You know, like they showed on the broadcast on Sunday's game, like Fantilli likely done for the season. Kent Johnson definitely done for the season. Boone Jenner, who I think we're going to talk about in a little while here, no timetable for his return. Sean Corrali has been gone for 2-3 weeks. He just got back in last night's game against the Hurricanes. Adaboquist out. Jake Bean done for the season with a broken hand. Danil Tarasov, who was, I believe, among all goalies who played at least 4 games in the NHL in the month of March, was 5th in save percentage. He had like a 930 save percentage in the month of March. He was phenomenal. And he's a big reason why the Blue Jackets have looked a lot better on the stat sheet, is that the goalie has been giving them a chance to win. So it's been a lot of little things. They've brought in some young guys that have shown that they deserve to stick around. I think Alex Nylander has decided that the Blue Jackets are going to be good, and he's in that part of the season where he doesn't have a contract for next season yet, and I think he is putting his best foot forward to earn an extension in Columbus. So like it's been a lot of things, but I would say goaltending is probably the biggest reason, and also just that the Blue Jackets love to try and ruin their own draft ranking by going on a heater at the end of the season.
Yeah, that's bad timing, I guess, is one way to put it. I mean, how many injuries in goal alone this year has this team had?
So they're currently rolling their 3rd and 4th string goalies. So there haven't been, like, last season, I believe the Blue Jackets played 6 different goalies in the season. So it hasn't been quite that bad this season. I think they're at 5 right now, with Malcolm Subban making his NHL debut. His Blue Jackets debut last night against Sunday. But obviously they picked Spencer Martin up off waivers, which was great news, because it turns out that Neil Tarasov was not ready to go at the beginning of the season. He had end of season hip surgery, I believe, or knee surgery last summer. So he wasn't ready to go. They picked up Spencer Martin on waivers. Elvis has been in and out of the lineup with various, like, no serious injuries, but like niggles and strains, and he gets sick a lot, which makes sense because he's got a young child, and those things are like germ factories. So like I get that, he's probably suffering from that kind of thing. But it's been tough. There's been not a lot of stability in goal. Neil Tarasov has been phenomenal when called upon. Jack Greaves has been excellent. He, I believe, is up to a 924 save percentage on the season. Granted, small sample size, but for a undrafted 22-year-old that I think is officially 6 foot and probably more like 5'10", as a goalie, I think is, it makes you feel really excited for the future. So goaltending it's been better than last season, but the bar was on the ground. So, they did manage to step over that bar, but it's still kind of, it's a little dicey, and I don't know when Merzlikins is going to be back. Tarasov, I'm pretty sure, is probably done for the season. It didn't look good when he went down versus the Islanders. My guess is that he's extremely concussed right now. And frankly, don't rush him back, because head injuries are serious. The season is meaningless. There's 5 games left. And there's no point making things worse for him, unless he's less concussed than anticipated. But it really did not look good when he went down against the Islanders.
Yeah, no, and Jack Greaves played very well against the Islanders as well. Obviously, there's been a tragedy in the Blue Jackets family. Boone Jenner dealing with some personal family issues, the loss of a child. Talk to me about how the team has responded to this tragedy.
It's been tough, like it was announced that I think it was March 29th. I think he missed the game because it was listed as illness. Missed the game after that, and then obviously it comes out after that it wasn't illness. What happened was he and his wife had lost their baby, which is awful and horrible. And we're all thinking of the Jenners in this time. Since then, I believe the Blue Jackets have won 3 out of 5 games, have looked better while doing it, and this is a really good. It's kind of callous to think about it like this, but having Boone Jenner out of the lineup is giving some guys a chance to show the coach what they can do. And I'm thinking of Cole Sillinger specifically in this example, because Boone Jenner plays so many goddamn minutes for this team that they're like, well, he plays 24 minutes a night on average sometimes, like they have to find those 24 minutes somewhere else. And so Cole Sillinger specifically has been getting the tough matchups. He got the Barzal matchup against New York. He got the Crosby matchup against Pittsburgh. He got the McKinnon matchup against Colorado. Last night, I believe he was mostly matched up against the Aho line in Carolina. So those are some tough matchups for a kid that I don't even think he's turned 21 yet. So, and the team is really, they haven't said a lot publicly about it, obviously. There's a lot of, I think that they want the Jenners to have privacy and to just kind of spend time with each other, as opposed to, trotting out this tragedy for the team as like we're doing it for the Jenners, etc. But I think it's encouraging that you're seeing the team, decide to show up. And I see a lot of people getting mad about them ruining their tanking efforts, but the Blue Jackets, and I didn't really get a chance to talk about this at the beginning, but the Blue Jackets are kind of, but they're locked in where they are, basically. I believe with the loss last night, I don't know what the Coyotes game turned out to be. I believe it's still going on as of recording. They're 5 points behind the Coyotes, who are ahead of them in the standings, and they are 10 points behind the Ducks. So Anaheim's not going to catch them. They're probably not going to catch Arizona. So they're basically locked in where they are. So I'm kind of just like, hey, let's have fun. Let's enjoy the wins, especially, that a win like against the Flyers, where they tied an NHL record that hadn't been done since literally before I was born. So the last time 6 defensemen scored in the same game for the same team was December 4th, 1992. So they did something that hasn't been done for over 30 years last night. That's fun. Yes. Jack Greaves was exceptional against the Flyers. He was great against the Islanders. It's hard to get mad about, obviously they didn't end up winning that game against the Islanders, but it's really hard to get mad about a win like the Flyers one when you're seeing, Blankenberg, who's been in and out, I think this was his 7th goal of the season, because he's been in and out of the lineup. He was injured a lot. He was down in Cleveland with the AHL. He was, he's been kind of all over the place. Comes back, plays his first NHL game since December, scores a goal. They had 2 guys get their first career NHL points against the Flyers. It's really hard to be mad about the team when the youth is kind of showing up in games like this.
No doubt. And that has to give hope and optimism for the future, seeing some of these young players do well. Jay, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
So you can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOB FORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. You can find us wherever you get Locked On NHL, on podcast apps, on YouTube, on SiriusXM. We're also over on Instagram now. I've been doing a lot of stuff with the Blue Jackets prospects in their respective playoff pushes. So they've got a handful of guys in the CHL playoffs. They've got a couple of guys they're going to be playing in the Frozen Four next week, which is exciting. So again, just kind of the future is looking real bright for the Blue Jackets. Even if right now is terrible, it's looking up, I promise. So I can't recommend paying attention to the Blue Jackets right now, but give us 6 months and then come pay attention to it. And I'm sure it's going to be much more fun.
Absolutely. All right, Jay, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. I want to thank my guests, Michael DiStefano of Locked On Leafs, Eddie Garcia of Locked On LA Kings, and Jacob Foster of Locked On Blue Jackets for joining me today. Don't forget, we are here every Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. So make sure you join us for that. I am Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks so much for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.